Hello and welcome to Lean In Leander. I'm your host, Andrew Naudine, and this is episode 19 of the podcast. It's also the 10th in the Vote in Leander series. Now, if you're new to the podcast here at Lean In Leander, we've spent the last few weeks talking to the candidates who are running for election in May. These are local elections, both for place 2, 4, 6, and the mayor's position on city council. They'll take place in May, and you can go to voteinleander.com to get information on dates and where you can actually go to place your vote. There's also information there to register to vote if you haven't registered already. You have until April 1st to do so. So a few days left here in March as of this taping. But if you happen to view the podcast after April 1st, I still encourage you to go and get yourself registered to vote. You need to make your voice heard. It's one of the things that I talk about quite a bit on the Vote in Leander series is the fact that only 3.5% of the population in Leander actually show up to the polls to vote for local officials. So I encourage you to get involved and make your voice heard. We have to have more than 3.5% of 80,000 people in the city voting on who represents them. So again, that website, voteinleander.com. Now, this episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with Troy Hill, who's the current mayor, and he's running for re-election. Troy and I had a really nice conversation. It's quite varied in topics. We, of course, talk a little bit more about some policies and things of that nature. He is the mayor, so that he does tend to go there. But I did have an opportunity to ask him a little bit about where he's from, what he does for a living. We even talk about Star Wars and Star Trek, which is pretty interesting at the end of the day. So I hope you'll join me for this episode. Sit back, grab a drink if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, turn it up a notch. This is my interview with Mayor Troy Hill. And welcome to this episode. We're at Sky Asian Fusion, speaking with current mayor, running for re-election, Troy Hill.
Well, hello, and hello, audience.
Thanks for taking some time, Troy. I appreciate it. I know you're super busy. We chased after each other for a little bit.
Yeah, my life is pretty crazy right now.
I can
only imagine. Much 24/7.
Right. No, I can imagine. And again, for full transparency, as I've done with any other episode where I have some familiarity with the candidate that I'm speaking with, Troy and I are acquainted. I actually serve on the Citizens Advisory Committee, which was Troy's committee. And so we've had multiple occasions to have interaction on issues and civics here in the city of Leander. But again, what this is intended for, and for the Lean In Leander audience, I really want to talk a little bit more about Troy, the person, as opposed to Troy, the mayor guy. So that's where we'll start. Okay.
All right. Awesome.
So I know from a little bit of research and looking in on your bios and things of that nature, you and your wife Sally, you moved to Leander in 2005, right?
Correct.
And I believe that was because your parents were already living here.
Well, they lived in Temple.
Okay.
So I grew up in Temple.
Okay. So that's where I was headed. I was kind of trying to figure out, where are you from, Troy?
Yeah, I grew up in Temple, so lived there for 21 years, and then kind of started my journey around the United States. Went to Chicago, was there for about 4 years, came back, moved to Houston, and in Houston I met my wife, and was there for probably 2 or 3 years. And the company that I worked for promoted me, moved me to Dallas-Fort Worth.
Okay.
So I lived in Flower Mound for about 13 years.
Yeah,
until I moved here. Yeah. In fact, we picked Leander because it reminded us of Flower Mound.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right. I see that.
I wanted to be on the north side because my parents were in Temple. And so Leander was very small, much like Flower Mound when we moved there. And much like Flower Mound has done since I moved there, it's taken off.
Right.
Both cities have. So.
Right. Well, I mean, we both know, and we've talked about this before, there's a huge influx of people coming into the state of Texas as a whole. I know that obviously from a state level, the effort has been to bring business to Texas. It's a business-friendly state, as they say.
Yep.
So I know that's led to a lot of the expansion. But I don't think it's nearly as pronounced anywhere else as what we see out here in Central Texas. Leander specifically.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it
crazy.
is. I mean, the growth that we're experiencing, I think 2019 to 2020, when we were the fastest growing city in the country, we grew at 12%. Well, last year we grew at 18. So I would not be shocked when the census comes out if we were the number one city again.
Right.
Or got to be in the top three, I would bet.
Right. Yeah, the other day when I talked to Marcy, I'm usually kind of a little conservative in the way that I talk about the numbers because I don't know them specifically. I've done some research, and I know that we were like at 56, 65,000, somewhere in that range, and Marcy's like, no, we're at 70 plus. And I was like, wow, already. So to hit the 100, 150, which is, I know some of the conversations we've had again in the past, talking about how much we think it'll grow, that's easily achievable, right?
Oh, I think in the next 2 years we'll be at 100. We think that we're 80,000 just by looking at water hookups, the average number per household, those type things. So we think we're about 82,000, which is incredible.
It's crazy. So you mentioned you got a promotion. You moved up to the Flower Mound area at that point. What kind of work do you do? I mean, I've never asked you that.
Well, right now I'm in sales. I've always been in sales.
Okay.
So my major in college was city planning. So I planned on going back to school and getting my master's, maybe taking a year off. I took a job that took me to Chicago, and I kind of never looked back. It was one of those things where, I was interested in politics, but more national type politics. I thought city politics was boring, quite frankly, and my professors in college were boring. So I really was like, oh my God, sit through a zoning meeting. Now, sometimes I still think that, actually, but,
I would hazard to guess you're not alone, okay?
Yes, if I have insomnia, it's definitely something I can play back, and that takes care of it every time.
That's funny. Nothing against any of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but it is a little dry toast from time to time.
It really is. It really is.
So that's something that you and I share, and I don't think we've ever talked about that, but I'm a sales professional. I've been in sales since, as long as I can remember, and kind of along the same lines. I was in school, moved to Houston, and needed a job, and initially it was my uncle who gave me a job in Houston. I was working for a placement agency, which was fascinating. And it was a place called what was the name of it? Media. Anyway, it was placement, but we were working with grocery and retail. So I was placing like general managers
in restaurants or retail.
Yeah, I remember placing a butcher one time at a grocery store, which is weird. You think about
butcher.
It. Yeah, now I mean, are there even butchers? But it was interesting because
did he show you how he could cut
had
up meat?
No, he seriously he had his whole resume, and he talked about how what his experience was and all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
For me, I mean, I was a young kid.
Yeah.
I had no idea, so it was super interesting.
That's awesome.
I also met my wife in Houston.
Wow.
So my wife was originally from Ohio.
Okay.
So
my wife was originally from Atlanta.
Okay, all right. So that would have been really weird if
that would have been a little too weird. Like, are we stalking each other?
Like, what's going on here?
I remember you. I remember you now.
Anyway, but so from a sales perspective, I mean, we always kind of understand process, procedure, methodology, and stuff like that. So just for kicks and giggles, what's your favorite sales methodology?
Oh boy. You know what I've always thought about sales is it's having a conversation with somebody. So honestly, it's about, I think, I usually sell to business owners, and I sell something that's going to help them in their business that they're going to resell. So it's really about training. It's about really showing somebody how they can be successful by selling my product, right?
Okay.
And I think that if I'm good at, telling them how, educating their sales force how, and then they are successful, I've got a customer for as long as that keeps happening.
Right.
So,
Right.
But I like the residual type sales because I think I'm a relationship person.
No.
You know.
I can relate to that because that is something that I personally favor
Yep.
that approach as opposed to more transactional sales.
Right.
Okay, so anytime you're dealing with B2B sales, it's a little bit different than B2C. So business to business as opposed to business to consumer.
Right.
And transactional in B2B is a lot of times, and I think you'll agree because you just kind of said you're more of a relational sale. It is too transactional. It's too, close a sale and move on to the next thing.
Right.
And I personally believe also that, the relationship that you build, the trust that you build is important, not only to the sales process, but to the long-term prospect for that particular client.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm fond of saying it takes twice as long to do it wrong. Okay? So when you're talking about selling someone a product or a service or whatever it might be, like what you were saying, if you show them how to work it, how to properly manage it, they should be relatively successful. That's what the product is designed to do. But over the long term, people have short-term memory lapse, and they don't remember all of the particulars. And again, it's something that they're not doing every day. Whereas when you're selling the product, it's something that you're doing every day. You're very familiar with it. So I think, again, from the relationship sales, it's interesting to be able to go back and talk to your clients. Maybe, you have some keystone, maybe quarterly conversations, just to kind of see how things are going, make sure that they're up to speed, and gives you that always fun and profitable upsell opportunity too.
Absolutely. Well, and for me, it's like I love the friendships that I've developed over the years with clients, and we'll go to sporting events. I've taken clients to a rock concert in San Francisco, by the way. That was fun.
I can imagine.
Baseball games, football games. Haven't ever done any vacation type things. Obviously a lot of golf.
Right.
And I'm terrible at golf.
Right.
So that's always an embarrassing.
Not my thing either.
Yeah. That's a little embarrassing to get out there.
I
First
literally
one
will
goes
avoid that.
way to the right.
No, I avoid
That's
that as
what
much as I can.
people say about me. Way to the right.
Double entendre. I'm not a golfer either. Not a golfer at all. My dad golfs. My son golfs. My son golfs with my dad.
Nice. They don't even.
They
don't even invite you anymore.
No, I just drive the cart. I'm there just to kind of make sure they get around. I just never could I just don't get it. People say golf is supposed to be like a relaxing sport, and it takes your mind off of things and whatnot. I'm like, I don't see anything relaxing about trying to put this little ball in a hole that's like 400 yards away. It makes no sense to me.
Well, to me, it's stressful because there's always somebody that's really good right behind you, waiting to play and watching you shoot, and then you hit it and it goes 30 yards. And you can kind of see the look on their face. You just feel it. Like, oh my God, why am I behind this guy?
It's a very judgmental sport. I will say that.
It really is.
I have tree dar. I can hit any tree. I can hit a tree on a links course. Okay, so
all the squirrels take cover, when they see you out there.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think there's a club of squirrels that kind of notify each other.
Funny.
Anyway, so so then you get to Leander, okay, and around what did we say, 2005, and I know initially you did some stuff. You started to work in Leander on the Charter Review Commission, and at the time the Economic Development Committee.
Yep.
So those were your introductions to Leander in general and Leander management, for lack of better terms. What has changed in the time that you were on one of those committees? Let's say the Charter Review. Well, no, let's not say Charter Review. Let's say the Economic Development. So you had an opportunity to sit in on economic development early on, when you came to Leander.
Right.
And now you see economic development today. So without getting into the nitty-gritty, let's not do deep dives, but just like in general, what would you say some of the major things that have changed in that period of time?
I think our attitude about business has changed. And honestly, if I could point to one thing that I think I've had a hand in helping, it would be that, we've kind of changed from an expectation that it was going to come to we're going to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is probably the biggest change, I would say, in, gosh, that amount of time, yeah.
So a shift from reactive to proactive,
Absolutely.
just to simplify it.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about it is that I think there was an attitude that existed that, well, when we get to X population, we're going to see Y, because Y, always follows X. And the problem with that is that, there's, in the meantime, housing was still going on here. What I'm talking about was economic development. So we see along Reagan, for instance, we see that land that should have probably been retail or should have been offices is residential. We kind of see that a little bit on 183A. So, had we been really intentional about reserving that land
Mm-hmm.
and done that, then I think we'd probably be better positioned than we are today.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's probably one of our biggest challenges.
Well, it's funny that you would say that because the conversation I had with Marcy just the other day, she mentioned something along those lines as well. And she's also had a little bit more of a tenure, if you will, in the decision making and the things that go around in and around Leander. Some of it direct as she's been on council, some of it indirect as she served with committees. The same thing would apply to you. I think it's a fair statement. But it was interesting because I didn't know this, and she mentioned that at a point the state legislature changed some rule or something like that about acquiring land, like a city acquiring land. I forget.
Annexation?
Annexation, that's the term I
Okay.
was looking for. So they made a change to the way that cities could annex surrounding areas.
Huge change.
Yeah, and apparently that led to what she called a land grab
Right.
in Leander.
Right.
Which again kind of goes back to, and tell me if I'm right or wrong here, I think that goes back to that whole process of reactionary as opposed to proactive.
Sure.
And I don't know if the timelines match up quite the same, but would you think that those two things kind of influenced one another?
Well, I think that it definitely was intended to beat the clock, to grab as much as possible before the clock ran out on being able to annex. I think about it differently. I think if somebody doesn't want to be in your city, then don't make them be in your city.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give people reasons. I mean, the annexations that we have now are voluntary annexations. So I could make a case to people that, look, here's why you want to be in the city. Number one, it could be water issues. Typically, when you're outside of a city, you're in a mud. You're on wells, and so those water sources are very unstable, unreliable in some instances. So, I think going forward, that's going to be the way that you entice people to join your city.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also land values. I mean, Leander right now is it city. So being in Leander kind of, I think it's a good thing if you want to, see your property go up in value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because when people say Leander, they know it's a fast-growing town. They have great schools. There's a lot going on, and I think that's a healthy thing,
So people who might have previously not thought to be annexed or to join in the city plot, for lack of better terms, there's a benefit to them doing so now as opposed to previously, in the sense that with the expanding economic base that Leander is developing and the long-term plan therein, it's beneficial to them, really, even just from a land value perspective, if they choose, hey, I have an old ranch out here,
Right.
My kids are not going to want to live in Leander,
Right.
I have this nice, acreage. let me annex into the city and then sell, because I'm going to get a better value if I sell my land as part of the city as opposed to being independent from it. Is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement. And there's another thing that I think is coming into play now, because even the land outside of our city is becoming, I mean, people move there too. I mean, and people are looking for homes, they're looking for businesses. So if you have a house and it's in our ETJ or outside of our ETJ even, what's to stop somebody from putting a storage facility, outside storage facility? Is that going to help your property values?
Right.
Probably not.
Right.
So if you are in the city, then the city would probably be able to keep that from happening.
I think that's a great point. I think it's a really great point, something I hadn't thought of before. So I'll ask, are there concerted efforts to do that? I mean, I hear about the ETJ and stuff like that, and as I've gone through these interviews, I've learned a little bit more about it. I understand it better now than I did previously. So is the city making efforts to reach out to those people and say, hey, here's the reason?
Sometimes. I mean, a lot of times they're in a mud, which is their ability to pay for wastewater or pay for water or whatever the case may be. And so they issue bonds, the neighborhood does. So Santa Rita is a great example. So when those bonds are paid off, if they join the city, we would be responsible for paying off those bonds. So you really have to kind of look at, okay, we're going to get this much taxable value, coming into the city versus this much we're going to have to pay off in bonds. So that makes it kind of tricky. We got some areas out there that I think would love to be a part of the city. I mean, I just met with the owner of Santa Rita Ranch, which is an awesome neighborhood. It's, I think, the 11th fastest growing planned development in the country. And it's amazing. It's going to be 8,500 homes. It's like its own city.
Right.
And I think there would be some advantages for them to be a part of our city. Again, because you know what's going to come next to you, and as much thought and effort and sweat and blood that they put into making this really awesome, and it is. You don't know what's going to be, and we face that as a city, because I think one of the misconceptions is that we have control over who goes where, and really that can be dictated by prior zoning. So when a city annexes areas, they're going to zone it whatever. I mean, if it's a rural area, it's going to be single family rural, which is like a ranch or acreage. So to do any type of commercial, you need to come in for a zoning change, right? But if there are some tracts out there that are zoned commercial, for instance, and so if somebody did want that outdoor storage facility, they could do it. If they wanted to put something with a drive-through, they could do it. So I think those type of things are the advantage of being in a city. But even in the city, there are times where if somebody has the zoning already, and I'll just bring up apartments, there's really nothing we can do to stop it. Now, they have to comply with our new ordinances, so whether that's garages or masonry, something like that, because we have tried to at least say, if you're going to bring it here, we want it to be nicer. We want you to maintain the value that you have when you open the doors, which typically doesn't happen with apartments.
Sure. No, I always equate it to my experience in Houston. There's just zero zoning in Houston.
Right.
I mean, it's just non-existent.
It's a mess.
And it's a mess.
It's a mess.
It's a hot mess, because you end up with overdevelopment in certain areas that taxes the infrastructure in such a way that the inconvenience to everyone, even in the surrounding neighborhoods, becomes even more pronounced.
Right.
Like, I always think about my lifetime in Houston. We lived in the city for a while when the kids were little and stuff like that, and we ended up moving out into Cypress, which is northwest Houston, probably closer to Austin than Houston sometimes.
I like it.
but there's a street there, 1960, which is an old
Oh,
farm
yeah.
to market road.
Know it well.
And I remember growing up, well, not growing up because I didn't grow up there, but I was already a young man, and my brother and I would go to a Cajun bar that was way out on 290. It was past 1960, and I remember 1960 as a smaller road. And then eventually it kind of got to the point where it was, I think it was 4 lanes, and just the building that they did on 1960 was, it was crazy. It was
Oh, yeah.
insanely overdeveloped, to the point that now when you drive to Houston, 1960 has a flyover 290 now, which is just
Wow.
insane because there's so much traffic
Yeah.
traveling on 1960 that they had to do something to alleviate the pressures that were being built there at the 290-1960 intersection. And that's within 20 years,
Yeah.
you know, so
It's crazy. They have so much sprawl there.
Mhm.
I mean, and it's, you know, the problem is that when you just allow even retail type development, and it's just average run of the mill, one retail center looks like another, then literally you're going to get empty retail, empty retail buildings. And so what we're trying to do is, look, there is a place for them. There absolutely is.
right.
In fact, we're sitting in, you know, a restaurant
Right.
inside a retail
little
center,
strip, yeah.
a strip center. And but what we're trying to do, and I think it changes things, is, look, we're encouraging restaurants to, you know, to put an outdoor patio, put a courtyard, you know, put chairs outside if you're a coffee shop, you know, if you're a bakery, you know, have benches outside. Just people want to be outside. And I think that was happening before COVID. I think COVID has just amped that up.
No, for sure, for sure. I think you see it. You see the changes, and you know the businesses that did have already that outdoor facility obviously benefited from that because they were able to ramp up at a little bit faster pace than those that didn't.
Right.
You know, which obviously everyone was affected by COVID. You and I have sat and talked about the effects on COVID. Actually, it's one of the reasons I'm still on the Citizens Advisory Committee, because we literally lost a year.
We did.
And so it was like, okay, so what do we do? And I think that I don't know if we did this officially or not, but I think we kind of benchmarked it. Okay, you lose a year, you know, let's wait till the next year before we move on.
Sort of why I'm running.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going with this. I appreciate you picking up on that. So your service to the city as far as council is concerned, you served as a council member for 3 years.
Correct.
And then you ran for mayor.
Correct.
And now you're running for re-election.
Correct.
So that's about a 9-year arc should you be reelected. And I know that in talking...
That's 63 years in dog's life. So.
Yeah, I can see that. I definitely can see that. But what I was going to ask you there is that's a huge commitment of time. And as I've pointed this out almost every single interview, and I think it's an important factor in understanding why people do this, is it's a volunteer position.
Right.
There's no payment. You don't get paid for being the mayor of Leander. You don't get paid for being on city council.
Nope.
You know, my understanding of the charters is that maybe there's some stipends when you guys are all together and you do stuff. I guess that's kind of how it works a little bit. But
we've never done that.
Okay.
I mean, you get reimbursed.
That's what I mean by that.
You know, if we drive our car somewhere, obviously, then
Right.
the city reimburses
But that's
us
it.
for gas.
That's it. I mean, that's like,
it.
you know, and it's 50 cents on the mile or whatever it's anymore.
That's it.
I can't keep track of it. So why? Why? I mean, that's a long time
It is a
to
long
do that.
time. It is a long time. And quite frankly, I didn't plan on running again, you know, and I was vocal about that. But, there's always a but. So the first year was tough because, you know, we were, you know, there was a definite mindset change and in the election that I was in. And, you know, pro-growth candidates were elected. And, but we didn't have 4 votes, so we couldn't make any real changes. The next year, another election, and 3 people that are like-minded or elected, all of a sudden we're off to the races. And what we did was we went in and just started dissecting these ordinances that make it hard for businesses. So some of them made no sense whatsoever, you know. In fact, most of them didn't. And they definitely were a barrier to businesses locating here. So give you a great example. You buy a piece of land. There's nothing on it. So let's say that there's 3 parcels of land. You own one of them. Well, the first one in had to put the access behind the property, and then they had to do right-of-way and put that road all the way across land that they didn't even own. So what do? Well, who wants to be the first? You know? So there was so much waiting, or, you know, it literally became a barrier. And, you know, things like the smart code and our TOD, which is the central part of the city, there's absolutely no excuse for a lack of development. And yet it had been 12 years and there was nothing. I mean, that tells you something, right?
Yeah. No, it does. I had the pleasure of talking to Alex Steinberg.
Yep.
Probably been about a month or so now. And again, I did not intend for that to inform the way that it has as I've talked to candidates. But I found it very interesting in his project, in the Northline project, that it took him about 6 to 7 years to get that through all of the various, you know, I would say ordinances and things of that nature, to where the project was green-lighted, essentially. And then it's going to take him about another 10, maybe 15 years,
Right.
somewhat impacted by COVID, but nonetheless,
Right.
it would still be a length of time. So you end up looking at a project like that, which is, you know, high-density urban kind of thing. It's a
Right.
bigger project on scale than most of the stuff that
Huge.
happens around here. But that's a 20-year arc.
It is.
And, you know, you look at other projects, and even if you say, okay, let's say they're, you know, a fourth of that size, I think it's relatively, you can say, okay, that's probably going to take about 6, maybe 7 years to get that thing done,
Yeah.
to where it's finished and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
That has to impact the planning, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, most of those type of projects are 20-year projects, and it takes a lot of money. I mean, you know, most people think about the Domain now. The Domain didn't start out the way it is now. It started out as a, you know, a retail destination with big box stores. You know, then residential. There was a little bit of residential, but then, you know, the emphasis was on residential, and then some restaurants were there. They took off, and it kind of snowballed. And then you had companies that are looking for, you know, skilled younger workers, millennials, and so they said, we want to be where our employees want to be, or where they're living. And so you see the HomeAways and companies like that locate there. And I think Leander's very similar. You know, we had tried so hard and long to get companies here. We have availability of land, and it just never really took off. But I think the way it's starting to take off now, and I think the reason is exactly the same. Because what we've done is we created a place where people want to live. Well, that's where employers want to be. You know, so we are seeing the companies that have 500 jobs that are starting to look here. You know, I think the biggest inhibitor now is the cost of land, because the residential developers have driven up the price so much. It does make it hard for commercial and office to locate here. So that's the challenge right now.
No, well, I mean, it's not easy.
It's not easy.
It's not.
It's not
I am
easy.
I am under no illusions that the process is easy. Which again is kind of like going back to the fact that you've done it for 6 years now, and you're looking to do, and we can all I think generally agree that, hey, because I know I've seen that, you said at some point, or at least I've seen it quoted, that you had said, hey, I'm going to be a one-term mayor, that type of thing. But I think, growth mentality is also accepting of change. And,
Exactly.
a growth mentality would be one that, okay, if I feel that I can still contribute or if I feel that I can still make a difference, then, I've changed my mind.
Right.
If you felt otherwise, then, maybe you might not have. And obviously, COVID, I think, impacted your
Oh
decision.
my
I think that's a
gosh.
fair statement, right?
COVID really became the determining factor because, okay, so I really, we really started taking off that second year. And it's funny, you can look at our sales tax revenue, and while it was going up, you can see in 2018, it literally went straight
Oh, you
up.
got the hockey stick.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we had so many projects lined up. I mean, literally the day that Austin shut down, we were at a entertainment venue in Austin. And I think they're still coming, but it's been a year.
Mm-hmm.
And they were impacted probably as much or more than any other type of business
Mm-hmm.
because now they have a game room. Who's letting their kids go to a game room,
Mm-hmm.
during
Mm-hmm.
COVID, or touching bowling balls,
Mm-hmm.
So, it put everything on hold.
Sure.
Now, we did well because we had added enough restaurants. We've got a Lowe's that was just busy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
HEB was busy all the time. And we opened 130 new businesses in a pandemic, which is amazing. And so we had a good year. However, when you think about the evolution of the city, it stifled it without a doubt.
Right.
So here I am.
So the small, I mean, and I like the fact you talk about the 130 businesses that opened during the pandemic, because I think that's notable.
Yep.
Not only from a perspective of the economic impact that'll have
Right.
to tax revenues and things of that nature in the city. I think it's notable also that that's a change in paradigm as far as people who I think, and this is just my interpretation of what I think may have happened, is that you have people who live in Leander and were forced by the pandemic to stay in Leander. And so then you kind of start looking around and you're like, okay, well, if I really want to do X, or if I, maybe now's the right time to go ahead and open up the restaurant or the bakery or whatever it might be.
Sure.
And it gave them an opportunity to sit and think about that and then make a decision. So
Definitely.
you and I have talked about this before one time in a meeting, even if it was just in passing, but I asked you, I said, Troy, what do we do to keep them here now? Now that they've started to look at being here and opening the business and whatnot, how do we keep that? How do we make sure that tax revenue doesn't start to spill out into, Cedar Park and Georgetown and Liberty Hill and stuff like that? I know you, and I don't expect you to have a specific answer to that necessarily.
Well, I kind of do. Actually.
I kind of wanted to ask you that because I was like, this is because it's an interesting, interesting perspective that you would not have had opportunity to take a look at had it not been for the pandemic.
Right. It is a very interesting thing, right? So the theory is you bring in the employers not only to employ people where they live, but you also want daytime traffic, for instance, for restaurants and other types of retail or businesses that you have, right? And most of the business we initially had were service-related businesses. So, companies that, orthodontists, dentists, people that do business with homes or homeowners. And so, we tried so long, just giving tax incentives, everything else to get those companies here. Because sometimes it came down to, well, it's 50 jobs, so we're going to give X amount, for 50 jobs because our restaurants need that. Well, with COVID and the fact that maybe up to 40% of people may not go back to an office for 2 years, all of a sudden that's changed. We have daytime traffic. And not only that, if people are in their homes, well, I think they probably want to get out for lunch, They want to get out of the house once in a while, right? So it shifted my thoughts into, okay, we need to kind of shift and think about that retail, think about that restaurant, think about the entertainment. So how do we keep them here? We do not have an employment problem. What we have And I think what we will have is finding enough employees for employers. We don't have an unemployment issue. So that's going to be a challenge. We live in an affluent area for the most part, with high household income. So, and kids now, they're involved with sports, they're involved with other things. They don't always work that job at HEB or in a restaurant like this. So I think the way to keep people at home, because I do think it's a competition, right, is you create that destination. And what I've tried to do is looking at different parts of the city. I want a destination for the northeast side, let's say along Reagan, and I think the Reagan 29 intersection is probably going to provide that opportunity. Also Reagan, when you're coming into the city from Cedar Park and Austin. Same thing, and obviously in the TOD, and I think the TOD is going to be pretty amazing. I mean, Northline is going to be a fantastic project. Now we added the lagoon to it. It's 5 minutes away, and we've got another landowner that's. It looks like we got some entertainment venues that are going to be locating right there. So in that whole area, think about the opportunity to have it all in one area. You've got higher density around it. We've got the trail system right there. We've even got a single family home neighborhood 5 minutes away to the south that just broke ground, around 89 acres of parkland around a little lake. So all of a sudden you mix all that together, and then 5 minutes away is Old Town, which, for years and years and years, we wanted Old Town to be something special. Our city didn't develop the way that a lot of cities do, so we never had a downtown.
Right.
So the question is, how do you make it into that? How do you make it into the place? And I think now it's finally starting to do that. And the early businesses that were there, the Leander beer markets, the Smooth Villages, the Casa Costas, they've added to the flavor, if you will, of what Old Town is. Old Town shouldn't be just like Northline. It's completely different.
Right.
It's called Old Town for a reason.
Right.
So, honestly, we okayed the Old Town Park this year, and what I did was last year I brought to council a way that we could recover more Parkland dedication fees from multifamily developers, because they typically don't build parks around apartments. They want to build more apartments.
Right.
So they usually write a check. So we increased the fees, and literally it was used to pay for Old Town Park. So it doesn't come out of taxpayers' money. It doesn't come out of our parks budget. Didn't affect any other park. It was just paid for by those multifamily developer fees. But what it's done, and literally yesterday, I posted on my Facebook about a new restaurant. And the gentleman said, look, one of the reasons I chose this is because I want to participate in that park when you get it open. I want to rent it. Now, we haven't even discussed whether we want to rent it, but I'm all about, increasing, the number of music festivals that we have. Or, I've suggested we have a wine fest in the fall, because we do such a good job at these festivals. And we attract 10, 15,000 people to our Christmas event and Liberty Fest. And now, Old Town Fest has become big. So you start to go through, and it's just people are coming, right? So I think we've got the start on Old Town to make it. I think it's going to be like Rainy Street. That's what I think, because I think you're going to see the real growth around Austin is north. So it is Cedar Park, it is Round Rock, it is Leander, it is Liberty Hill, right? And so we're competing with those cities for everybody's attention, right? Or everybody's dollars, whichever way you want to look at it. So if we build something in Old Town that's different than what Georgetown is, and I think it's going to be really different.
Yeah, I would agree.
The town square. I think we're going to have a little bit of everything. and I think that's what's going to make us unique.
No, I think, again, my time on the Citizens Advisory Committee, we talked a little bit about what Leander is, how to define Leander, or how to market Leander, for lack of better terms, and I think all of those things contribute to that ultimately being a place where people can live, work, and play, and now even more so. Yeah. I think. I'll touch on what Alex said about the Northline project, and him making a little bit of an adjustment because of the hub and spoke type of developments that are being discussed quite readily in business conversations now, because I think businesses have recognized the genie is out of the bottle. Right. Okay. Yep. I think you and I may have already known this, because I'm assuming that sales, you probably worked at home a lot. You're a little bit more independent. I've been home working for 8 years. So when the pandemic came around, it was really no effect to me. It was like, I've been doing this for a long time. I already know how to do it. The big impact is my wife there too.
Right. It's not just you and the dog anymore. It's not just me and the dog.
Yeah, exactly. It like changes everything. But with that said, I think a lot of people have had that opportunity now. I think I can count. Well, I can't count on my hands. Maybe my hands and my feet. How many people in my neighborhood, in my subdivision, who work from home? Yeah. I mean, it's the majority. I think clear cut, it's the majority. I talk to the guys all the time, and we're always talking about the fiber and being able to have the Wi-Fi signal, because we're working. We're not just watching March Madness, which, damn it, Illinois, what the heck? That was crazy. I can't believe they lost that game. Texas too.
Oral Roberts.
Oral Roberts.
Oral Roberts.
Anyway. But I think you hit on some really good points, and I appreciate you sharing what I would say is kind of, at least to a degree, your vision, like what you see and how you see that coming about going forward. So I know that our conversation ended up talking a little bit more policy and stuff like that.
Well, I think there's another component to that.
Okay.
That I'll throw in the mix also. One of the differences with Leander compared to our sister cities, we've always had executive housing. Really, Crystal Falls was, really the subdivision, the planned development that really put us on the map, if you will. And so we've had executive housing, and it's never really come to play, like other cities would say. When I first got elected, I did a mayor's forum with Round Rocks and Cedar Parks, and the one thing they said about us that they wish they had was executive housing. Well, you know what? It's going to come into play now. Mm-hmm. And the reason is, if you're a company, and let's say you have 50 employees, and your company's in Austin, all of a sudden everybody's working from home. You live in Leander, mm-hmm. So your employees are very productive at home. So all of a sudden you're paying $50,000 a month for this office, and you're going,
why am I paying that?
I could have a smaller footprint, which I call flex office, and I could have it in Leander, so I don't have to drive anymore. And my employees can come in and they can use the conference room. They can, meet with me. They can meet with HR. Our tech department. And so I think the big thing going forward is going to be this flex office space. Yeah. And I've been encouraging people. And it's amazing, because in the 2 or 3 instances where they're doing it, they're sold out before they put a shovel in the ground to start building.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Well, and again, I think it makes sense. And again, it is a paradigm shift.
It is.
That is a direct result of the pandemic. And again, the genie being let out of the bottle. Because I think for a long time, a lot of corporations were saying, you can't work from home, you're more productive here.
Right.
And the pandemic has shown that's just not true.
It's not true.
Now, if you, as a culture of a company, you want everybody there, that's a different subject. And, you're going to, now I think you're going to pay a premium for that. Right. I think you're going to have to pay employees a little bit more to get them to go back in the office.
You're probably right.
So it'll be interesting. I'm sure we're going to be able to see a lot of that.
It's a behavioral type thing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I see it that way, because what I do for a living, we talk about behavioral aspects. I work for a company that gamifies software.
Yeah.
And so it's all about behaviors. It's all about, the way that people will react to certain situations, if you will. Again, I'm oversimplifying it, but you can see it in game. You can see it in game theory. You can see it on and if your kids play. You have kids, right?
Oh, yeah. Too many.
Too many kids. Your kids are a little bit older, right? I think your son is the oldest, if I remember
Well, I
correctly.
have 3 sons.
Okay.
They go 28, a daughter that's 24, a son that's 21, and then a son that's 18.
Okay, so you're
he's still at
18.
home.
Yeah, your 18-year-old is the one that I'm familiar with.
Right.
I knew that. I think the last election you said was his first time he voted or something along those lines.
Well, that's my middle son.
Was that your middle
Yeah.
son? Okay.
He still hasn't told me if he voted for me, but
It's private. You're not supposed to know. But with that, I mean, where I was going with that was like they probably have gaming systems. They pay Xbox or PlayStation or something, especially the guys.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's pretty much as good. It's a good even split between guys and gals because they're all playing. But it's really interesting that, and the reason I bring this up is because it's about that paradigm shift. It's about the way that you look at things. And in gaming, you can create a situation or scenario where the players are playing, and you can depersonify, I think is the word, how they play. So not only can they not be seen by the other players, they literally kind of lose themselves in the game. Okay, and the behaviors that come from that are really interesting. It's interesting if you. One of the things you can do is if you say they were costumed, and again I'm oversimplifying this, but say your character is a nurse. Well, your performance in the game is going to be more caring because you're a nurse, as opposed to if you are a soldier. Your tendencies are to be a little bit more aggressive as a soldier. It's super interesting stuff.
that is very interesting.
It's fascinating. It's super fascinating.
Does it turn a very calm, kind of a sedate person into, a raving lunatic?
It can. There's a really good example, a very topical example.
Facebook?
No.
I'm just
Well,
kidding.
that's a completely different paradigm there.
I'm just kidding.
No, there's a really good example. That basketball player recently who was playing online in a combat game, I think it was, and someone was recording it because they do Twitch and all that other crazy stuff. Now, someone has a recording of it where he used derogatory language in the gameplay. But that's what happens. That's that depersonification. Is that he was caught up in the game. He wasn't thinking of it as himself. He would normally himself never say that, I would imagine. But because he was not thinking of himself in the game, he said something that he might not otherwise say. It's super interesting. I don't know why we went down that path. I didn't want to go too much into that. I was trying to get somewhere and I've lost my train of thought. But anyway.
Well, I don't know if you are a Star Trek or a Star Wars fan.
A little more on the Trek side.
Okay, me too. Absolutely. So I think it was the most visionary show of my lifetime.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And if you look back, it was made in 1964. And the idea that you could be in space and everything's about computers, and then, the holograms, remember that? And,
the communicators. The communicators are literally your phones. That's literally what it was.
Absolutely. Now, if it had a phaser on it, I'd kind of like that. I would definitely kind of like...
No, the phasers are separate from the communicators.
Separate. Yeah, but that would be kind of nice. It's an upgrade iPhone.
I don't know. Well, it's not Steve Jobs anymore. Who is it? Tim Cook.
Yeah,
I don't know if Tim Cook would be into that.
Probably
He's
not.
A pacifist.
There's probably some legal hurdles to get by.
Although an app, if they allow it.
That is true. Somebody would do it. I can assure you.
Anyway.
But I do think that show was so visionary about the future and what we're seeing now, and I mean, it's pretty amazing actually.
Yeah, no, I talk about it all the time. I mean, in my lifetime, it's a 50-year arc essentially.
Yeah.
And in 50 years, the amount of changes that have occurred are absolutely remarkable in the scheme of history as a whole. When you look at history as a whole, you put in the past 50 years, and you're just like, wow, what happened there?
That's a lightning bolt.
It was crazy. Yeah. It's crazy, and it hasn't stopped. It continues to evolve.
I'm sure our kids will look back and go, gosh, remember when you had to actually drive a car?
Right. Well, I mean, you remember black and white television.
Oh, absolutely.
My kids have no idea what black
Oh,
and
yeah.
white television was. I mean,
And
they
it had
never
like
to deal with it.
one channel.
You used to have to go turn the knob yourself.
Oh, the first video game was Pong.
Oh yeah, no, it's crazy.
You literally watch this thing go.
Right, and we played it for hours.
Oh my gosh.
Played it for
absolutely.
hours, and you used to get to where you could hit it really hard. And,
Of course.
anyway,
Too funny.
well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you
Sure.
so much for taking a few minutes to talk to
Yeah.
me, and hopefully give people a little bit of insight into
Absolutely.
the thinking and the way that you go about your business. It's meant to be a little bit more personal from that perspective. But I do want to make sure you have an opportunity to tell people where they can find you as they go about their research and whatnot and your campaign. So
Sure.
why don't you feel free to give people an opportunity
Well,
to know
I
where
do
you're at.
have a website. It's troyhillmayor.com. So you can go on, you can kind of go through the issues and learn a little bit about, my viewpoints about some of the things, some of the hurdles that we face. I know water's a big one, I would encourage that. You can leave a message and I'll call you back. I always do. And you can reach out to me, by my email at the city, which is thill@leandertx.gov in an official capacity. So if you have a question that you want me to answer as the mayor, I'd be glad to answer it. So, we're all in this together. We're building a pretty amazing place. I'm very excited about the future. I think that Leander's going to be the type of city that people want to live in. And, it is now, and we're literally just beginning. It's going to be that good. So,
Well, the future is yet to be written, so
Yes.
we shall see.
yes.
Regardless, I want to thank you for what you do because, again, it's a volunteer thing. People, you give up
Yes,
of
it
your
is.
time, and I appreciate that. I always have. I have a deep appreciation for the people who are currently on council. I have a deep appreciation for those people who are running to be on council. It's
Right.
like that's a big thing to take on.
I tell people the hours are long, but the pay's bad.
right. So again, thank you for your time. I
Thank you.
appreciate it, Troy.
Absolutely.
For those of you who have not visited, make sure and visit voteinleander.com for information on dates when you can actually take your vote or place your vote, I should say. There's also some information on there on registration, which ends on April 1st. So if you haven't done it, get it done. And we'll see you next time on Lean and Leander. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.